Hello everyone. Welcome to the E-Institute webinar series on public-private partnerships. I'm Shyamala Shukla, Senior Consultant in the World Bank Group. And joining me now from New Delhi is our Principal Investment Officer of the International Finance Corporation, Neeraj Gupta. We will talk about global trends in public-private partnerships in grain storage today, beginning with that and then going on to the specific case of Punjab, which Neeraj had helped, and in fact he had worked actively on structuring it, and he had helped the Punjab government bring it to market. He is also a specialist and head of our global team, which looks at grain storage PPPs all over, and also other storage solutions. And it would be very interesting to hear him. But first, we look at global trends and what is happening all over in the world. Talking a little bit about how we want to approach this, we will go through a brief overview of the food prices, and we will also look at the rationale for PPP, what are the value drivers and PPPs, and does it apply in the case of grain storage PPPs. We will look at some of the PPP models around the world which are just developing. I wouldn't say we have perfect PPP models right now, but we can see that there are trends and things are moving all over. We will also give you a little bit of a brief overview. This will be very brief on some of the countries as you see in the list on the slide, which are experimenting with various modalities. And we will follow this up by the specific case of Punjab, which Neeraj will present to you in some amount of detail, so that you know how this PPP, which is already operational for the last couple of years, is working, and what were the kinds of problems in terms of the technical and financial issues that this project had looked at. I'll also introduce you now to our knowledge product on PPPs and grain storage. This one is a paper which we have produced. As you can see, we have an extended team on the right, and all of these people from government, from the private sector, from the International Finance Corporation, from the World Bank have given and contributed a lot to this paper. And we have tried to convert all of the tacit knowledge that these practitioners have all over the world into a knowledge product, a paper, where we have some country cases, we have some related technical information on how to do silos. We have a couple of bite-sized videos, which we will also bring to you at some point of time from practitioners who have worked on these. And we have presented it to internal audiences. And now through this webinar, we are trying to come to you. Going over to the basis and the context in which we will have to look at PPPs in many of the cases. As you know, food prices had soared during the financial crisis of 2008, and the graph on the right shows you the trend in food prices through the 1990s and in the 2000s. And you can see a big spike, which is 2007-8. And following that, you will see that while the food prices did come down, the volatility remained. And what was the response that you saw in these countries? We have a list here where you can see that countries responded by substantially increasing their or planning to increase the reserves that they have in order to cater to their emergency, as well as have a strategic food reserve, and also for their food programs. And countries also started looking at the wastage that was going on and how to bring more efficiency into this whole business. What are the value drivers of PPP? Before we go on to PPPs in grain, we should look at these value drivers. I have here an excerpt with some changes from our reference guide, which is a basic reference on anyone who wants to do PPPs that the World Bank has put out. As you can see that a large amount of risk gets transferred to the private sector, especially the performance risk, the risk during the construction period, areas where governments have not traditionally been able to do well. And you can also see that the whole of life costing, which we hardly ever do in government programs, gets done in the case of PPP projects. And you bundle all of these different elements, which we are not able to bundle properly when we do it through the government traditional procurement. There's also an element of innovation. The latest technology can come in when you have the private sector in. There's focus on service delivery, and governments are doing various things at once and are not able to focus on this aspect of it. There's also mobilization of additional financing. Governments have faced fiscal constraints, and although efficiency is the core issue which makes us do PPPs, it's also the financial constraints which help us make us look at PPPs as a viable option. And accountability is something which we have seen traditionally that PPPs do bring in, which we find lacking in a lot of the government procurement. How does the same thing, the value drivers, how do these apply in the case of public provision and private provision? I've talked somewhat about it while talking about value drivers. You can see that governments have, in public provision of storage, been unable to scale up storage to the extent they have wanted. India is an example, and we'll come to it later. There's been a traditional lack of fiscal space, and in the case of private participation, governments have successfully been able to defer the payments instead of upfront financing and capital investment. What they have been able to do is to defer that over a period of 30 years or 20 years or whatever is the contract period. Efficiency in management, you have private sector managerial skills, better processes, cost savings, everything comes in. Poor repair and maintenance is related to the life cycle costing issue that I spoke about. We rarely do this in government projects. And of course, sector modernization and transfer of performance risk, which I referred to. And then going back again on the right side, top right, you see this is the best rationale. When I read this, I thought there's really no other reason why we should be doing PPPs. Post-harvest losses are so high, and if we can do something to prevent that, we could probably feed so many more people than we are able to right now. And coming to the next slide, these are global PPP models that we looked at. There's this whole spectrum of the public sector doing it fully. You have examples in almost every country which is a developing country, where governments have traditionally taken care of storage on their own. And you have the totally private sector, management of storage, ownership as well as management of storage. On the other hand, at the right side of the whole spectrum of PPP that you see. I've given here a few examples from the countries we have looked at. Nigeria, Madhya Pradesh in India, India itself in terms of the FCI project that it's doing, Oman in the Middle East, and then we have the case of Punjab, and Pakistan, which is now undertaking its RFP for a project. The Philippines, of course, is a different case, and we will come to it. So it's a whole spectrum, and which applies well for any country is something that you have to look at in the context of the food policy of the country. You have to look at it in the context of the volumes that would be handled, and many other strategic considerations that are there. And what is the purpose and the objective for which you want to do a project. I tried to get into this slide everything about how things have evolved in India. In India, it's a true evolution in the sense that India has had a policy of private sector financing in different ways from as early as 2000, when it had its national policy on handling and storage and transportation of food grains, and then it followed it up by private financing of storage infrastructure through the PEG, the PEG scheme of 2008 and 9. where the government guaranteed payments and rehired storage which was built by the private sector. Then we came up with a silo project in Punjab, which the IFC helped the government to structure. And now we have 10 projects which have been bid out and agreements signed in the case of MP. So it's been a whole evolutionary character, and that is perhaps the reason why the PPPs are quite successful in India, because there have been various stages through which the government has passed. And in these graphs that I have on the slide, you will see why it's necessary. While the total storage capacity of the stock has increased, but the total storage capacity that is available has been rather stagnant, and both owned and hired, and government has not been able to keep pace with the kind of procurement they're doing for various purposes. And this has resulted in a lot of wastage. You can also see that they have created capacity in the right, lower right, capacity created under the PEG scheme, lower right slide that you see here. So this has been work in progress, and it's been building towards more of a private involvement as they go ahead. Madhya Pradesh is a case which has come up recently. 10 projects, as I said, have been bid out. I've seen, as you see in the lower table, lower left table, these have been bid out on BBFOT basis, and these are at 10 locations inside Madhya Pradesh, 50,000 capacity each, and government support has been provided in various forms in this. 20% of VGF is allowed, although as you see, the status is kind of different, and these have been successful in attracting a premium in a couple of cases and a very low level of VGF. That it appears that the private sector is confident that it can carry it on its own, mostly without much of support from the government, other than availability payments that are there and guaranteed availability payments for 10 years. And if you look at the projected investments in storage by the government of Madhya Pradesh, it's a choice that they have made, that they will go in for different kinds of options. It will not be totally steel silos with a VGF option. They have steel silo option with the business guarantee, and they have rural godowns which they will build on their own, possibly some of them, as you can see from the public investment of 2 million metric ton. And there's some where they'll give the private sector some incentives to build more storage. So it's a whole range of options that they are using depending on the kind of project, the location, and other issues involved. And why, the government should go in for that. You can see how much surplus wheat there is. The green part of the figure on the right is the surplus stock, and they have been building this over the years. Agreements have been signed in all cases here, and it's going well. In the case of Pakistan, there are some lessons here that we can see. Pakistan started this entire thing of going in for PPPs from 2010 onwards, and there was a feasibility study that the government did, and IFC was retained as a transaction advisor. RFQs were floated for BO projects. There were pre-qualified bidders, but surprisingly, there were no takers for the RFP. And the RFQ is being now repeated in January 2014. Some of the lessons that we learned from this are, as you can see on the right side of the slide, that there was excessive bundling. The projects were bundled into slightly higher value projects, which the private sector wasn't, willing to take that kind of investment risk. The level of sophistication, because there was protein segregation in the case of Pakistan, I believe, and the level of sophistication was unacceptable for the market at that point of time. And the other thing is, these silos are based on payments by government, and there was a perception that there was payment risk. If you can remember, at around that time, there were issues with the IPPs in Pakistan, where the payment guarantee of the government had been called for a couple of times. So maybe that was the perceived risk. But now, with the new RFQ, things have changed, and the government has brought in certain changes which will be more make the private sector feel more comfortable with the entire thing, or so it looks like. In the case of Nigeria, it was a totally different set of circumstances. Nigeria is now structuring projects, PPP projects, and they will be concessioning out some 33 silos. And these storage complexes had already been built by the government, and these were there. And Nigeria in 2008 had plans for a very ambitious food storage program. But what happened later on was the government decided that it is better for these activities to be in the private sector. And secondly, the government was also facing fiscal issues in terms of actually, procuring that amount of grain which could be stored in this. So the storage was mostly lying unutilized, except very few of these silos. And so they have retained transaction advisors early this year. So they want to concession it not for their own use, like in the case of India. In India, the government is the buyer of the services, storage services. But in Nigeria, it's expected that the demand risk will be taken by the private sector, at least at this point as they are structuring it. And this will be an RBOT model. There is some requirement for refurbishment, etc. In the case of Zambia, there were pre-feasibility studies, but ultimately they went with the public sector option. So far, we don't see any PPP coming up. But you can see from the graph why they also had to think of storage. The procurement actually peaks up at some point of time. That's around 2010-11. Oman is another case where it doesn't produce much, doesn't procure much in that sense because it doesn't produce at all. And it thrives on import of food grains for its food security. And what they have done is they have 2 joint ventures already on which they are working, and this is through the private sector in joint ownership with the government of Oman that they are running this entire food program, the strategic reserves for the government. And now they are going in for some BOT schemes also, BOT silos, as I have mentioned here. This is also with the same parties who have been helping them in the JVs. So the negotiations were ongoing. Last we spoke to the chief of the PASFA. We come to the end of the spectrum now, and we have the Philippines, where there were 19 corn processing and trading centers, and these are post-harvest processing and trading centers which process corn, yellow corn, and these were owned initially jointly by the local government units and their Department of Agriculture. And initially they were thinking in terms of a PPP, but later on they felt, again as in the case of Nigeria, they felt that the government thought that there should be more and more private sector participation and government should withdraw. And so this is an outright sale of assets to the private parties, and the government is there only as a regulator of some aspects of this, and IFC is the transaction advisor to this also. In terms of early lessons, it's a little bit too early to really talk about lessons, but we have seen some, and now Neeraj in his presentation, which will begin very soon, will look at some of these issues. In structuring projects, the costs and bid parameters are very important. In the case of Pakistan, you saw that bid parameters can translate into no bids at all. And in the case of India, maybe Neeraj can explain a little more. They are pointing out to price disparities between Madhya Pradesh projects which have been bid out and the Punjab project. Of course, there are major differences between the 2 projects, although we don't know yet whether those differences can account for the difference in the tariff. That is, the one determined by the market in the case of Punjab, and the other determined by the government, set by the government in fact, and where the subsidy becomes the basis of bid. And other than that, risk allocation is very important. We have a question on risk allocation, so we will answer that at that point of time, since we already are a little bit short of time. what do you need to see when you identify risks and allocate risks between the private party and the public sector. And setting pre-qualification criteria is very important, as I spoke in the case of Punjab. And bid requirements relating to site and BO projects, these have the potential to increase risks for the private sector, increase costs for the private sector, and how you, what kind of pre-qualification criteria you have, and what kind of criteria relating to land you have at RFQ and RFP stage matters a bit in this. And we have seen in the case of the FCI projects that there's a lot of requirement relating to land, at least at RFQ stage. When we were looking at it a couple of months back, I'm not sure if some changes have been there. IFC is strategic advisor, and maybe Neeraj can point out to some of these issues also. There's also requirements relating to connecting infrastructure and logistics in the case of the Food Corporation of India projects, and we will look at it a little bit. We have a question on this, whether it's better to have the two combined, or whether it's good to have the two unbundled, the storage as well as the transportation. So we'll come to that. There are both parts to it depending on volumes and what you want out of it, but basically the trend is towards unbundling the two things. Now we come to the specific case of Punjab, and Neeraj from New Delhi, he's joining from New Delhi, he'll take over. Neeraj.
Thank you, Shamla. Just in the time check, Shamla, how much time do I have?
Okay.
All right, let me get into this. All right, sure, thank you. So India, as you would know, is a country which has a very large food security program. And about 5 years back, there was a strategic assessment done of what's the state of the storage availability of food grains in India, and how are the services being offered. What the policymakers assessed was there was a gap of storage capacity to the tune of almost 10 million metric tons. This is for wheat. Wheat and rice are the two staple grains in India. And out of this 10 million, Punjab, which is a state or a province in the northern part of India, which is considered to be the breadbasket of India because it produces more than 40% of India's wheat. There was the maximum shortage of storage space was in Punjab. Most of the grain in Punjab, more than 75%, was being stored and actually is being stored in very traditional non-scientific structures, which is practically open air. It's called covered and plinth facilities, where wooden platforms are created and grain is stored in jute bags on top of those wooden platforms. So the sector has been plagued by a lot of inefficiencies. There are bottlenecks in the entire value chain. There is wastage, and grain is actually lost in the system. And the estimates of these losses range from 2% to as high as 26%. There are various publications by Food and Agriculture Organization and similar such agencies which provide varying estimates. The entire value chain, which starts from the procurement of grain from the farmers by the government, the transportation of these grain, the storage of the grain, and then dispatch of the grain to remote corners of India. And remember, this grain is used primarily for the below poverty line families, for the poorest of the poor in India. The entire value chain is right now developed on the basis of bag-based system, which means a bag of grain comes in from the farmer, and in the value chain, the bag moves across the system, including storage. The storage is also in bags. So looking at this scenario, the government in Punjab, a particular entity which is used to procure most of the grain in Punjab, called PanGrain, it launched an initiative, and it approached us in IFC to work with them to determine what could be a good scientific storage solution for the grain they're procuring, and then to launch one of these initiatives on a pilot basis. So we conceptualized together with them a 50,000 tons bulk storage facility. These are just pictures which appeared in the press around that time. We started work in 2009, but this is around 2012 when the project was just being awarded. You can see Reuters and Associated Press, news agencies showing pictures and anecdotal evidence on how grain actually rots, primarily because of lack of good storage facilities. We partnered, as I said, with the government to conceptualize the PVP solution. And what we realized, and I think this is very important for an audience like you, particularly the policy makers among you, is that there were several policy choices that the government was grappling with. What should be the scope of the project? Because the entire value chain suffers from certain inefficiencies at some stage or the other. So should we try and reform the entire value chain? Should the private sector be brought in mainly for storage, or should the private sector also be involved in procurement, on transportation? Should we try and reform the sector and make it future ready, which is try and link it with bulk movement, connected with railways throughout the country, which will be a huge project, a significant operation. What will be the role of key stakeholders? In Punjab particularly, there are commission agents who are very deeply engaged with the farmers. They support the farmers in bad times. They are informal money lenders also. What will be the impact of any PPP solution on the commission agents? Should we continue, we as in the government, continue with the bag-based system, or are there opportunities to remove bags from the system? And why would anyone want to do that? Is because a bag-based system, one, costs much more. There are multiple handlings of bags, loading, unloading, and there are more losses when a system has bags in the value chain, because every time you load and unload a bag, the way the bags are handled in most of the work, it results in losses. There are technological issues which countries grapple with, whether I should go into steel silos or concrete silos, whether it should be a hub and spoke system, or whether it should be just discrete packages of silos. What should be the sizing of these capacities, and where all the silos should be located? Should they be closer to the procurement areas, or should they be closer to the consumption areas? And then finally, how do I, as I said, because these PPP contracts tend to be 20 to 30-year contracts, how do I, as a policy maker, provide enough flexibility so that these contracts can be migrated in when the need arises later on to enable sector reforms? And it was very interesting when we were working with the government, the guiding principles on the basis of which most of these policy decisions were made were not just purely business related, which is doing the cost benefit or doing an analysis of the technologies, but it was also lots of political economy related issues and issues around practicality of the solutions being considered. So we assisted the government with the detailed due diligence and structuring. Just taking a step back, I think Shamala touched upon this. Why silos particularly? Because again, this is one of the policy choices that we all have. Why can't we create much more scientific warehouses, which will be cheaper to construct and maintain than the silos? I think in the case of Punjab, the most important point on this slide is they want to preserve grains for a longer period. Because they are holding most of the stock that India has, they end up holding the stock sometimes for more than 2 years. And in basic warehouses, you should not hold stock for more than 9 months. Otherwise, it starts losing its nutrition value and it starts rotting. That was the main reason why they chose silos as the technological option. This question comes up very often when we're dealing with both bureaucrats and politicians in various countries. Whether my country I should go into steel silos or concrete silos. You see various pros and cons and which technology is suited for which kind of area. I think again the important point is for Indian locations, steel silos are more suitable. For locations around the coast, near the oceans and sea, which tend to be corrosive atmosphere, concrete silos are better suited. But I think the important point to note here is these are important considerations and questions, But end of the day, technology can be handled. You can have different kinds of technology options suited to your particular country environment. Uh, and in terms of purely in terms of economics, both have similar costs, similar life cycle costs. So roughly, if you see, steel is 60% cheaper than concrete, but then steel has about half the life of a concrete silo. In terms of maintenance, steel is a little easier to maintain, concrete is a little bit more expensive. But on a per ton basis, for the life of the silos, they're both more or less equal. So therefore, your choices should be determined by where you're located, where you want the facilities to come up, what is the local cost of steel versus concrete. Concrete requires specific construction expertise. So if your country has those kind of contractors who can help you erect these concrete silos, then concrete it will be valid to consider concrete silos. Otherwise, going to steel. If you need the silos to come up in a faster time frame, then steel is the option. But I've written here, it's a misplaced debate because, as I said, technology can be handled. This is a choice that experts can much more easily help you make, but there are more important considerations. Like this, again in most of the countries, most of Africa, much of East Asia, definitely all of South Asia, as well as large parts of Middle East and Northern Africa, our systems, we use bags in the entire value chain. The farmer brings the wheat mostly in bulk, but then it's bagged at the procurement center, and then the whole bag moves through the value chain. It's again, there have been lots of studies which demonstrate that bag-based systems are not really practical. We need to convert to bulk, at least gradually, because you have minimal losses when the system is bulk-based. But there are issues of practicality. A country as huge as India, for example, cannot move to bags through one project. It's the entire value chain one has to look at. So even if you store it in bulk, at the end of the day, when grain reaches a poor family in Bihar, at that stage it has to be bagged again. So unless the entire value chain all over the country is enabled to handle grain in bulk, there's no point experimenting on bulk in the entire value chain just for the sake of one single project. So the issues here are controlling the losses, optimizing the losses in the system. Linkage is one of the most important issues. Linkage both at the farm end as well as in the transportation end. If you want to transport grain in bulk, then both your road and rail-based infrastructure needs to be enabled for that. At the mandis are the procurement centers. You need to enable infrastructure through which you can handle grain in bulk. You can load it onto the trucks in bulk. Storage, it's very easy. Silos is bulk storage, and then the dispatch needs to be also linked for bulk handling. Now, coming to the PPP options, how do you try and attract private sector, and what are the structuring choices that you have? In storage solution, obviously you want the storage to be developed, financed, and operated by the private sector. Remember that most of the developing world does not really have exposure to storage silos except in Middle East and North Africa. There have been projects done in the last 3 decades by multilaterals, but these are pilot projects where silos were funded by multilaterals, both in South Asia and in Africa. But most of the food reserve agencies all over the world, all over the developing world, they do not really understand the silos technology. There is private sector out there, including operators as well as equipment suppliers, who are keen to help these governments. So that is something definitely private sector can offer. There's this big question of who brings the land, because those silos reduce the land footprint. Someone still has to bring in that land, and that's again a very local policy choice, depending on whether land is available, what are the issues around land acquisition. It's always, from a private sector point of view, it's always better if the government is able to arrange the land and offer for the project, like it was done in the case of Madhya Pradesh. Ownership of the silos after the contract period is over will the government continue to want to store grain in the silos, or is it okay, or is the government willing to let go of the asset and let the private sector continue to use it after the contract period? So the build, own, operate model, which we have been using in India for some projects, now we have also started experimenting with build, own, transfer model. The build, own, operate model is more appropriate where you expect the private sector to bring in the land. Because then the asset remains with the private sector, the land remains with the private sector, and the private sector gets to earn the upside from the project after the concession period. If the government is bringing in the land, then a build-own transfer model is more appropriate. The contract is, commercially speaking, the contract is very simplistic. The private sector builds the storage facility. The government makes minimum payment based on the capacity that is created, which is, so if it's 50,000 metric tons, the government pays for using the 50,000 metric tons on a monthly basis. Now, whether the government stores 30,000 or 20,000, the government pays for the capacity that has been created. And the storage rental is normally the billing variable. The storage rental can be structured as one single charge or a dual charge, which is a combination of fixed and variable charge, or even a three-part charge if you want to include transportation in that. These contracts are, again, as I said, these are plain vanilla contracts with minimal upside potential, because the private sector is constructing an asset and offering it to the government, for which the government is paying it. It's a take-or-pay contract. However, there could be various revenue enhancement measures, or more risks can be passed on to the private sector. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of warehouse receipts. It's a negotiable instrument which can potentially transform our farmers, the rights of the smallholders. So if you want to integrate that, that's a possibility. But then government will have to let go of the ownership of that part of the grain for which the warehouse receipts are being issued. That then becomes a private transaction between the storage operator and the farmers. The government can offer extra land to the private sector, which capacity can be used by the private sector to offer value-added services to the farmers. This was being done in the Madhya Pradesh project, and that's the reason why the storage rental was much different from the Punjab project. The private sector can provide ancillary services to the farmers. So in the Punjab project, these revenue enhancement measures were not finally considered by the government because the land was being mobilized by the private sector. The Punjab project was structured only on the basis of the silos capacity being created, which is 50,000 tons. So the private sector was required to procure the land and construct the facility. There were detailed construction specifications as well as performance specifications that were outlined in the tender document. The size was 50,000 facility. The operator was free to choose whether it wants to set up 5 bins of 10,000 each or 10 bins of 5,000 each. So it's purely guided by his or her own land requirements. They were to operate the facility as per the agreed performance indicators for the duration of the contract, which was 30 years. Grain was to be accepted from the farmers. It was supposed to be tested, cleaned, and stored in bulk by the private operator. And when the government sends in requisitions, the grain was to be dispatched in bags. So the grain comes in bags, it's debagged, it's stored in bulk, and then it's bagged again for dispatch. Now, this was not the most optimal way to structure the value chain, but given the political economy issues, given the presence of commission agents, and the government decided to do it in this manner. But the contract also provides for future migration in case the government moves to a bulk value chain. So I think that was one good decision which we came to appreciate also. To deal with immediate political economy issues, sometimes you have to let go of the most optimal solution. But while structuring the contract in a manner that it's amenable to future changes and migration to overall sector reforms. The payment was structured in two parts. There was a fixed storage rental, which was the bid variable, and then there was a variable fee, which was structured as a percentage, a 7.5% of the fixed storage rental. So the operator gets a fixed rupees per ton for the 50,000 tons, and a variable fee per ton of wheat that moves. So every time, let's say 10 tons is moving, they get a particular rupees per ton for the 10 tons moved. And at the end of the concession term, the operator continues to use the facility and will have no further responsibility towards the government. So this is just a pictorial representation of what I just explained. The farmer comes in at the facility. LT Foods, which is a medium-sized, one of the largest exporters of basmati rice actually from India, they won the concession, so they're the concessionaires. So LT Foods tests the grain when the grain comes in. Once they get the go-ahead, the government authority makes the payment to the farmers, and then LT Foods cleans and stores the grain, wheat in the silos. When government wants the grain to be dispatched in different parts of the country, they puts in a requisition. LT Foods sends the grain to the government. The government sends the trucks to LT Foods, and LT Foods loads the grain onto the trucks, and then the government is free to dispatch it wherever the government wants. And the bid variable I earlier mentioned was fixed charge plus variable charge. So by design, it's a very stable business for a private operator, because you have a very predictable and stable revenue flow, which is dependent on the capacity that's being created. So it's what we call in PPP jargon, it's a plain vanilla contract, which does not have too much upside, but your downside is also protected. So it's a stable cash flow business. Now, why would it make sense for the government to embark on such an initiative, particularly when the global thumb rules say that storing wheat or rice in a traditional warehouse is half as expensive as storing it in a silo? So this slide throws some light on this issue. So if you see, though these numbers are from India, but these are equally applicable, we've seen time and again in different parts of the world, particularly in Africa. The rental from silos, the life cycle cost, which I want to mention, is roughly about $25 per metric ton. The warehouse rental obviously varies from city to city depending on the real estate prices, but in Punjab it was about $17. So you have a difference of about $8. Silos are expensive by about $8 per ton. So it would make financial sense for the government only when the losses in the system are more than $8 per ton. So what it means is, taking the procurement price of wheat, the data I must admit is 4 years old when we did the project. The procurement price was $225 per metric ton, and $8 works out to about 3.5% of the procurement price. So what it is for a government of
Neeraj, we have a couple of minutes more for you to wrap up, because we have a few questions.
Yeah, wrapping up. So for a government, it makes purely in terms of business, it makes sense for them to embark on such a project if they estimate their current losses to be more than 3.5%. So this 3 to 3.5% becomes a good thumb rule, that if in your country the losses are more than 3 to 3.5%, this makes even makes a business sense to do such a project, apart from all the other benefits of storing grain for a longer period, land footprint being smaller. This is just a conceptual design of the facility. So 5 silos of 12,500 tons each, 10,000 tons each, and how the trucks circulate, the traffic flow patterns, and how the grain flows. These are again technical parameters which we help the government work out. It totally depends on how the grain flow happens, the time duration. So the whole facility was designed on the basis of 166 metric tons per hour processing capacity. The project, these projects, because food security directly affects the poor, it is for the poor, so it affects a large number of poor people. They start getting more nutritious grain. We are now doing the countrywide rollout, helping the Government of India Food Corporation. So that is going to impact 20 million people. That's why these projects are very important. They mobilize large amount of private capital. The Punjab project particularly was the first of its kind, and it has won many awards internationally as a innovative PPP model. There have been a lot of publications which are all in the public domain if you want to read more about these. And finally, the operational facility at Punjab. I've been to the facility many times. It's working really well. The farmers are happy, and the government is really happy that they're getting better quality grain, much better quality grain than they get from the warehouses. And this is just a snapshot of building on the model from Punjab, which are the other places where we in IFC are working on. Shamla has already touched upon them, so I won't repeat them. So that's it. That's on the model. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeraj. We now have some time for questions. We have overshot, both of us did a little bit, and we have some 12 to 13 minutes for questions. And before we go on to the questions, I would ask you to please watch out for the paper that we have. We are on the point of, in fact, completing and putting out in the public domain. This is called Global Trends in Public-Private Partnerships in Grain Storage. And now to the questions from the audience. We had some questions in advance, and the first question is Abdul Hafiz Malik, who's asked, do we have a portable quick install on-field grain storage solution for flood-prone and other adverse condition areas? Recently, if I'm not mistaken, and Neeraj will back me up with this, the World Bank has signed an agreement with the government of Bangladesh for silo projects inside flood-prone areas, the cyclone-prone areas, I should say. And there they have the option of the smaller size family-level silos which hold very little grain and are airtight, and also the larger community or government storage silos. On the technical, portable or other issues, Neeraj, could you just put in a word, briefly answer this? If you have information, if you've been working on this project?
Yeah, no, I've not been working on the project, but we've been interacting both with the World Bank colleague as well as the experts working with him. So that's true. These are, they are considering silos, steel silos, and this is mostly for paddy actually, not even rice. This is for paddy which has the husk rice. So they are designing silos. It's just, I think, the difference that I believe in the technological differences, these are much more, the tensile strength of the steel required is significantly higher than what it is for normal wheat silos or rice silos. Plus the foundation for these silos is going to be much more strong because they are, as you rightly said, they are in coastal areas and flood prone areas.
Thank you. The next question we have is from Vijay Kumar. He says, countries which have hitherto followed the strategy of developing infrastructure for bulk storage and bulk handling of food grains in PPP mode as integrated projects are now moving away and switching to handling these two operations separately. So which is economically, which makes better sense? That is the gist of his question. And he has now also asked another question here where he asks if there is a case study to resolve the problem of requiring land from the investor or because what happens is that if the private party has the land in advance, then it means there's uncertainty. He might not get the project but is left with the land, and the contrary position is that after award of the contract, the price of land records shows an upward swing if he goes in for the land later. So in terms of case studies, I would say that you have the case studies in your own backyard, and you have the case of Punjab where the land was required from the private sector, and the private party had 3 months after the signing of the contract to bid award to get the land. And in the case of FCI, you are requiring that the land be identified at a slightly earlier stage, which is something which the private sector pointed out while we were doing this study, this review of countries, that this has in fact created some bit of, increasing uncertainty, increasing risk, as well as increasing costs. Neeraj, would you like to talk about this?
Yeah, no, I think this is a very good question, and from a private sector point of view, and therefore also from a bankability and lenders perspective.
Yeah, say that both from both the private sector as well as the public sector point of view, this has an impact on the costs basically. So the cost of the bid. So what would you suggest as a good model over here? The MP model, of course, is there where they just give the land, so the land issue doesn't come in and it doesn't affect the prices much. Of course, it does, the overall costing, and as you've seen, the price has gone down in the case of the Madhya Pradesh projects. But would you like to put in a word here about what you think would be a good case for Mr. Kumar to look at?
Yeah, no, I think land given by the public entity is always a better option for both the parties involved. Definitely, very obviously from the private sector perspective, because you're right, it's a big risk from them at the bidding stage also. Though we've seen very good response to all the tenders that have required land to be brought in by the private sector. But I think many credible and larger companies shy away if they have to bring in the land for obvious reasons. And for the government also, it's a good idea to try and identify the land and offer it to the private operator, because they have the policy prerogative and a responsibility to determine where exactly these assets should come up. And also it helps them take over the asset after the contract period is over. And remember, whether it's steel silos or concrete silos, on paper a life of steel silo is about 30-35 years, but the bins as well as most of the handling equipment can last for much longer. So it makes perfect economical sense for the government to take over these assets after the life. On your other questions, which is breaking up the contract, into storage, transportation, separate contracts, I agree with that as well, because mainly because you have different kind of private operators dealing in these areas. You won't have the same private operator who has the expertise of constructing and managing silos, may not have, and definitely will not have the expertise to manage a large fleet of trucks or railway wagons. So it is a good idea to break these contracts.
Right, and we have a question here from Paul Sean, who's asking, in your model here, the most important consideration for the private sector partner is the price they get per MT, right? Yeah, I would say that's the revenue source. So it's very important in the kind of models that we have talked about, where government is the buyer, and it would also be the case in the other model, where the Nigerian model also, it will be very important about the price they get per MT. I would say this is very important. Neeraj, what do you think? How do you think it applies in the case of Madhya Pradesh and Punjab? In the case of Punjab, of course, the price was discovered through the market, the bid. Whereas in the case of Madhya Pradesh, they set the price and they try to discover the entire cost through the VGF bid criteria. So what would you say to this?
So price is of definitely prime importance, but price is also the bidding variable. So in a sense, the private sector knows at what price level will the project make sense for them. I think also of equal importance, if not more, is the payment security mechanism, because these projects survive almost completely on payments from the government or a particular government entity. And as long as the government entity pays, it's fine. But the day the government entity for some reason stops paying, that's when these contracts are tested, and that's where problems arise. So from a private sector and also a banker's perspective, adequate payment security mechanisms on so that the government default, the risk of government default is adequately covered. That's also very important.
Right, and there's also, I would like to point out here, there's a difference in the Punjab and MP models. In the MP model, they have a 10-year guarantee. that might be continued or may not be continued. Whereas in the Punjab model, you have a total 30-year guarantee, right? So how do you think this affects the perception of the private sector, Neeraj?
No, it definitely does. What it means is that for 10 years, my revenue is guaranteed, and after that, I am left to feed for myself on the basis of the market forces. I will have to find an alternate buyer of the services after 10 years. I may have to. And that's a risk that I know for a fact that bidders incorporated in their own financial bid. Uh, because sometime in some of the cases, even in 10 years, they were not getting a decent payback. So they loaded the price because of this risk factor.
Thank you. We have some more questions, but we'll have to, defer them to email or something else. And we have our emails here on the presentation slides, as you can see, my email as well as Neeraj has his email on this. So please don't hesitate to send us any questions, and whatever questions you have asked here and we haven't answered, please send those too. And also any other experiences that you might have. There might be consultants here with us who have worked on silo projects elsewhere. Please do inform us about your experiences. It would be very good for us. And unfortunately, we will have to end now. But before that, I would ask Neeraj if he has any, last final remarks or key issues that he wants to bring up in a minute. Neeraj.
Thanks. I think there's one important question that the presentations will be shared. I'm sure it'll be on the website. But my main remark is that look, as policymakers, whosoever in the audience, I'm sure there are some policymakers. These are all important choices you grapple with, and I think it's important to take a holistic perspective of the sector and use these interventions as opportunities to reform and make a difference in the sector. So what it means is don't just look at storage solution or reforming storage solution as making a big impact on the value chain. Once you're embarking, take this as an opportunity to review the entire value chain and see what all is possible.
Neeraj, thanks. And I see many more questions also coming up here, but I would say please look out for the paper which I have spoken about. There is a question about the cost-benefit analysis calculations. Unfortunately, we cannot answer that now, but we have a small financial model in the case of Madhya Pradesh, which we have parts of which we have presented in this paper. So please do read that. And thank you very much for being with us today on this webinar. And this webinar recording as well as the PowerPoint presentations will be made available to you on this site within 24 hours. Thank you very much.